Okay, class, it's time to begin our session. Thank you all for coming and being with us. And if you haven't seen the board, please check in if you would. That would be great. And for those of you at home, thank you for watching online. And if you too would check in, that would be great so that we would have a record of your participating with us. Appreciate that very much. So, whoa, where are we? Got the wrong one. Who put that up? Oh. Okay, technical difficulties. It'll say lesson 4, I think, Dana. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so I thought maybe we would do just a bit of review since this lesson is continuation from last week's lesson. Basically, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on, what were we studying? Yeah, Proverbs. Good job. We were studying what God hates, and this was our base scripture that we used last week. These 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7, are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren. So that's our verse that we're working from, and we worked through that a little bit last week. And one of the things that we said, the definition of hate in this particular instance, is to detest or to abhor those things which are abominable. And so when it says that God hates something, this is a good definition to picture in your mind to say this is what that's talking about. And then we defined abominable: a disgusting thing or a scheme that brings about evil. So God hates these things, and these are the 7 things we're going through. Last week we looked at the very first one, which was a proud look. A proud look, and we talked extensively about that. We talked about the lying tongue and how God hates lying. We talked about hands that shed innocent blood. Hands that shed innocent blood. And we ended there, so we're going to try to do the last 4 this evening, if we can get through them. So, lesson 4. One of the commercials that I remember from a kid that was on TV a whole lot was a commercial that said, it was about an American brokerage company. And the commercial would go, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. Yeah, everybody listens. So when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. Well, guess what I found? Let's see if this works.
You'll never regret the purchase of a good stock. You don't say. Yeah, my broker says it's a real good buy. What does your broker say?
Well, my broker's E.F. Hutton. And Hutton says, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
Well, there you go. So, any event, one of that commercial came to mind as I was studying this lesson. And while this financial advice, of course, is important, probably, at least for some folks, one of the things that's probably or should be more important to the rest of us is that when God speaks to us through His Word about the things that He hates, we should probably listen. And so that's the correlation. So let's look again, continue with the 7 things that God hates. So number 4 was a heart that devises wicked plans. A heart that devises wicked plans describes, I think, a person who has a wicked heart and is always planning something evil. Growing up, again, I knew several people like this when I was in high school. They seemed to always be looking for opportunities to do something bad to somebody else, whether it was a student or whether it was a teacher. And we would typically label these guys, and we here would probably label these guys thugs, because they were always plotting to do some horrible thing to somebody else. Sometimes, and I think we would all agree, sometimes there's some people that are just rotten to the core. And these are the kinds of people I think that God is talking about here, that He hates a heart that devises evil plans. We've got a couple of examples that I want to look at. The first one is with Ahab and Jezebel, and you'll remember that story. It's taught all of the time in class, in the kids' class. But let's read through that, and Bill, I think, is going to read that.
Now it came to pass about after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel besides the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, "Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is close beside my house, and I will give you a better vineyard than it is in this place. If you like, I will give you the price of it in money." But Naboth said to Ahab, "The Lord forbid me that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." So Ahab came into his house sullen and vexed because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." He lay down on his bed and turned away his face and ate no food. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, "How is it that your spirit is sullen and that you are not eating food?" So he said to her, "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else if it please you, I will give you a vineyard in his place.' But he said, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' Jezebel his wife said to him, 'Do you not reign over Israel? Arise, eat bread, let your heart be joyful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.' So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with a seal, and sent letters to the elders and to the nobles who were living in Naboth in his city. Now she wrote in letters saying, 'Proclaim a fast, and seat Naboth at the head of the table of people,' and sent 2 worthless men before him, and let them testify against him, saying, 'You curse God and the king, then take him out and stone him to death.' So to the men of the city, the elders, the nobles who lived in the city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them, just as it was written in the letters which she had sent to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth at the head of the people. The 2 worthless men came in, sat down before him. The worthless men testified against him, even against Naboth, before the people, saying, 'Naboth cursed God and the king.' So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent word to Jezebel, saying, 'Naboth has been stoned and is dead.' Then Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead. Jezebel said to Ahab, 'Arise and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth and the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, but dead. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab arose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to possess it. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Arise and go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, which he had gone down to take possession of it. You shall speak to him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Have you murdered and also taken possession? And you shall speak to him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, in the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, the dogs will lip up your blood, even yours. I read more than you said.
That's close enough. Thank you, Bill. And welcome back. Bill's been gone to Texas for over a month, so it's nice to have him back. So, Ahab desired to have a vineyard that did not belong to him. And though he was a king and probably could have summoned the armies to come and get it, he didn't. But what he did do was he acted like a little kid. He went home and pouted, threw a little temper tantrum, kind of like a little kid. And of course, Jezebel wanted to satisfy him and make all of that anger and hurt go away. So she devised this wicked plan to have Naboth murdered. And of course, as Bill read, we see that that's exactly what happened. He was murdered. But in that process, her fate was also sealed. If we would read that whole chapter, we'd find out that she was taken and eaten by the dogs, and they threw her overboard, sort of, out in the street, and she died just as the prophet said that she would. So some people, well, she got thrown out. Yeah. Some people might call that karma, somebody getting what they deserve. I think in this scenario, I would call that God's justice. He provided what she needed, which was justice. And unfortunately, that's probably not exactly what we always want. Our second example is Joseph and his brothers. And of course, we don't need to read that story because we know the story so well. Joseph's brothers couldn't stand it because their father loved Joseph more than they did him or did them. So they plotted a scheme about killing him. But in the process of that, they decided that he was worth more to them with dollars and cents. So he was sold into slavery. And to cover up their wickedness, they hatched another plan to try to fool their father and cause the father to think he was dead. And while they thought they would be feeling good about that, after a little while it started rumbling around, I think, inside of them, and they began to feel bad for what they actually did. And so not only are others sometimes affected by wicked plans, sometimes the people that devise these wicked plans also have a tendency to regret it after the fact. And of course, we know the story. We learn that God intervenes and turns Joseph's brothers' wicked deeds around and uses that to save the Israelite people. And so that was obviously a good thing. Our third example comes from the book of Daniel. And of course, that's another story you all know from young up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were put into positions of power because of Daniel. And the people didn't like it. Here are these foreigners that are in charge of stuff that they have no business to be in charge of stuff. And so these people found their opportunity when the king decided that he would make an idol and then require all the people to worship that idol. And so these folks devised this plan to say, we're going to tell the king that these three are not bowing down, which they weren't. And so the king found that out and summoned them and said, you have to bow down to me or you're going to end up having a fiery death. And so even though their death seemed imminent at the time, God delivered them from the fiery furnace, which of course changed the king's mind all about God. So he did 180. I'm guessing that the people that devised the plan probably didn't do so much of that because they wound up being the ones thrown into the fire. And so sometimes people's wicked plans backfire on them. So we always have to be cautious, I think, about that kind of thing. Certainly there's lots of other stories in the Bible we could spend time looking at, but we unfortunately don't have time to do that. So how the people plotted against Daniel to get him to be eaten by the lions, that's another story. How the Jews were constantly plotting to put Jesus to death. That was just an ongoing thing of his whole ministry life. They were always after him. Judas devised the evil plan to betray Jesus, but that was one of those backfired things because then Judas felt so much remorse, he killed himself. There seems to be, in my view, no end to these types of examples with people who have a heart to devise wicked plans, which, as we just read, God hates. So as Christians, we can avoid entangling ourselves in this sin by simply keeping ourselves, I think, focused on God and making heaven our goal and not worry about what's going on over here. The more time I think we spend thinking about how to help others and how we can be greater servants of God, the less time we're going to have to think about and devise evil plans. A couple of verses to go along with that. Genesis 50:20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And of course, this is Joseph. Meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. And then Romans, very common verse. Most of people in here probably can quote this verse. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. And so that's kind of our brief rundown of that particular hate that God has for devising wicked plans. Number 5, feet that are swift in running to evil. Feet that are swift in running to evil, my thought was, describes those who are eager to do evil things and will go out of their way to run to the evil way. Another high school story. Many kids, I thought, rebelled against their parents during high school, and they did all kinds of things contrary to what the parents told them to do. The time period that all of us went through during that, I think, was a challenging time period, as Satan was, in my view, in high gear with a bunch of young men and young women who are transitioning from adolescence to adulthood. So many emotions and so many opportunities to do the wrong thing. It's easy to see how bad choices can quickly devour us. Another thing that I think fits into this, that are running to evil, is gossip. Gossip is an example, I think, of this sin that God hates. Thanks to our media, of course, and now all of our social media, our society's been trained to spread rumors about others without finding out if it's true or not. Just 2 days ago, this shooting that happened in Boise, the social media was running rampant with all kinds of bad information and all kinds of things that are scaring people that weren't true. And in fact, Meridian police had to get on social media themselves and debunk all of that stuff that was floating out there. But people just seem to want to, talk and to share and to cause all of this discourse when it's obviously not necessarily a good thing. Some people, I think, our society almost has been trained to spread rumors about others without finding out if it's true. Some people can't seem to wait to tell someone about the latest piece of gossip. But unfortunately, we Christians, we need to try to avoid getting caught up in that kind of activity. Even if someone tells us something that is true, we need to ask ourselves if there's a valid reason to tell others what we heard. Just because something is true doesn't mean that we need to be telling the world. Let's try to use great discretion when it comes to repeating things that we've been told so that our feet aren't swift to running to evil. Let's look at a verse. 2 Kings 5:20 through 27. Before we read that verse, let me just give you the background quickly, and most of you will remember this. This is about Naaman and about knowing that he was a mighty warrior. He was the captain of the military for King Aram. He was a great man, highly respected, and was the recipient of the Lord even as a warrior. The Lord had been on his side during many of his campaign battles. But Naaman was a leper. And so during one of the army's raids, a little girl from Israel was taken captive, and that little girl wound up being the servant of Naaman's wife. And that little girl said to Naaman's wife that if Naaman would go to the prophet that lives in Samaria, that prophet would heal him of leprosy. And so Naaman decided maybe that was a good idea. So he went and he got the blessing of the king, and the king wrote him a nice letter to introduce him to the king of Israel. And in that letter, the king of Aram says, "And while you're at it, could you heal him of leprosy?" So the king of Israel opens the letter, introduces Naaman, and asks the king to do that, to cure him of leprosy. Well, the king was beside himself, tore his clothes and said, "Am I a god that I would have this ability to do this? This foolish king who wants to fight with me all of the time, now he thinks that I can cure a man of leprosy." Well, I think at this point in time, a little divine providence, divine intervention happened because Elisha heard about this event, and he sent away to have Naaman come down and see him. And so Elisha told him to go, once he got there, to go and dip in the Jordan 7 times, and of course he'd be healed. We know the story. He rejected that, said, "I'm not doing that silly thing. Our rivers, that we have are a lot better than this awful Jordan, so why would I do that?" Well, fortunately, some with a little clearer thinking process next to Naaman finally convinced him that, what could it hurt? And so Naaman goes and dips in the Jordan and was healed. So then Naaman, once he's healed, he tries to pay tribute to Elisha for blessing him and causing him to be healed from leprosy. And that's where our story picks up. And Dick is going to read that.
Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman and this Aramean by not accepting from him what he brought." As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after the Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything is all right, Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talented servant and 2 sets of clothes. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged the Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. Then he went in and stood before his master, Elisha. Where have you been, Gehazi? Elisha asked. Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time you take money or accept clothes, olive groves, vineyards, flocks, herds, men servants, and maid servants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and he was leprous as white as snow.
So here's this guy Gehazi who was really eager to deceive Naaman and make a quick buck, so to speak. Ran after him, pursuing an evil way. However, eventually he learned that that was not the right thing to do, because obviously Naaman was cured of leprosy, and that leprosy transferred right to Gehazi, who now was a leper for the rest of his life. So I think the story here, we can learn, well, many things we could learn, but we don't have time to talk about many things. So what we're going to learn, I hope, is that Gehazi did, and we need to learn from him and not set our heart on pursuing evil things, because it's never worth it in the end. The best way for us to make sure we do not pursue the evil way is by pursuing, of course, the righteous way. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:11, but flee from these things, you man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. And I think that is a good segue into number 6, which is, Larry, let's see. Can I have your microphone? Microphone. Oh.
I was just going to say, you can imagine that Elisha and his servants were living from day to day and week to week, and were uptight financially, and it was a struggle to support the group there. They were studying the Word of God and doing all kinds of good things, and Gehazi says, it would be great if we could get a little bit more money and a little bit better clothing for people, and there's all kinds of good things we could do with what Naaman brought. But it really sounds like you're saying, Dave, that in God's eyes, the end never justifies the means.
Yeah, that's a good comment, Larry. That's exactly correct. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, number 6, a false witness who speaks lies. Okay, so here's an interesting deal about lies. Remember, we've already talked about lying. So now God is going to reinforce His hatred of lying. So we've already heard about it. We're going to hear about it again. 2 out of the 7 things God hates: lying. False witness who speaks lies, I think, refers to someone who gives a false report against somebody else. And of course, our society, again, has no problem with this kind of a sin. They practice it all of the time. Just think about Hollywood. They portray this sin in a courtroom drama where the defense attorney will bring all kinds of people in to testify whatever the defense attorney tells them to testify to, not truthful, and they just proliferate that case. And so this attorney or lawyer brings in these false witnesses to testify about somebody, some guilty person, or trying to get a guilty person off most of the time. And of course, let me just say, that's Hollywood. In the real world of lawyering, hopefully that doesn't take place, because they have an ethical and moral oath that they take to make sure that things like that don't happen. But Hollywood shows it all of the time, and what do we watch? We don't watch what the normal courtroom is happening down wherever. We watch TV, and we see that day in and day out, and our kids see that day in and day out, and all of a sudden, it's just normal. It's just everyday routine. And so if that's what they do on TV, then that's what we ought to do out here in the real world. And so others have been known to be false witnesses for friends, to help them win money, or put one of their enemies in the jail. They'll say just about anything they want. I read a story about two brothers who were always fighting with each other. One day they were chasing one another around the house, and outside of the house, and back in the house, and all around, and one brother gets inside the house and locks the door. And the other brother's outside now, yelling, screaming, let me in, I'm going to get you, and if you don't let me in, I'm going to break down this door. And so what happened was the brother inside the house just smiles. I'm between you. That door's between me and you. You can't get me. Boom! He hits the glass on the door with his hand, shatters the glass. Fortunately, he wasn't injured significantly. But what do you think they told their parents? What do you think they told their parents? Well, we know what they told them. Well, the door just shut really hard, and by happenstance, that glass broke out of there. So here we have one brother being the liar and the second brother being a false witness, confirming what the liar was saying. And those are the types of things I think that we need not to be part of, and we need to avoid. We should do our very best as Christians to not be a false witness against anybody. Proverbs 19:15. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who tells lies will not escape. Let's look at quickly another couple of examples. Mark 55. And of course, this will be familiar to you. Now the chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain testimony against Jesus to put him to death. They were not finding any, for many were giving false testimony against him. But their testimony was not consistent. Some stood up and began to give false testimony against him, saying, well, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without hands. Not even in this respect was their testimony consistent. So, since Jesus had done nothing wrong, the Jews had to bring in false witnesses to make things up, to charge Jesus with some sort of a crime when he didn't ever commit it, because they knew it wasn't true. But the only way they could bring that amongst the people was to make stuff up. So the Jews were so desperate to get rid of Jesus that they were willing even to break the 10 Commandments in order to create this false witness stuff. Our second example, again, a very familiar section of Scripture with Stephen. Then they secretly induced men to say, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God. And they stirred up the people, the elders and the scribes, and they came up to him and dragged him away and brought him before the council. They put forward false witnesses who said, this man incessantly speaks against this holy place and the law. For we have heard him say that this Nazarene, Jesus, will destroy this place and alter the customs which Moses handed down to us. though Stephen, just like Jesus, was innocent, these false witnesses came forward and so that they might put him to death. And obviously they accomplished that very thing. Paul, this happened to Paul several times as he did his missionary journeys, and people would come up and accuse him of things that he didn't do. Lots of false witnesses. Any way you look at it, being a false witness is wrong. And God hates that sin. And so if God hates it, so should we. Number 7, one who sows discord among the brethren. One who sows discord among the brethren, I think, describes people who go around trying to cause division by creating strife within the congregation. If they find someone that they don't like, they'll say and do whatever they can to turn the rest of the congregation against that individual or family. They're never satisfied with one person or family, though, because they will always find something wrong, it seems, with someone and will try their best to turn people against them. When a person who sows discord does not like what he is being taught by the preacher, he will work hard in the background to find others who will listen to him and get them to fight against the preacher and anyone else that holds to what the preacher is teaching. His main goal, I think, is to push his own beliefs on others until there is division over that issue. I suspect amongst all of us in here, we could relate story or stories about this very issue. And it's so sad within the church, but it has happened and it does happen. The Bible warns us many times to watch out for such people because they're dangerous and they can cause great harm to the church. The good news is it doesn't exist here at Linder Road, and we're blessed because of that. Let's look at some scriptures. Ephesians 5, 6, and 7. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partakers with them. Colossians 2:8, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. Romans 16. Now I urge you, brethren, keep your eye on those who cause dissensions and hindrances contrary to the teaching which you learned, and turn away from them. For such men are slaves, not of our Lord Christ, but of their own appetites, and by their smooth and flattering speech they deceive the hearts of unsuspecting. Titus 3. Reject a factious man after a first and second warning, knowing that such a man is perverted and is sinning, being self-condemned. 1 Timothy 6, O Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to you, avoiding worldly and empty chatter and the opposing arguments of what is falsely called knowledge, which some have professed and thus gone astray from the faith. It seems like there are significant scriptures that talk about this very issue that we need to be very in tune with and be cognizant of this very concept of causing division. So I think we can see some things that out of these verses mark such people to avoid them. Reject divisive people after admonition. Don't get caught up in petty arguments that have nothing to do with salvation. Be willing to take a stand against divisive people. So, what is our application for tonight? What have we learned? Yikes. We must change our ways to God's ways. We need to change our ways to God's ways. We need to love those things that God loves and hate those things that God hates. We must rely on God's wisdom and diligently seek it. I leave you with one more proverb, Proverbs chapter 6. My son, observe the commandment of your father. Do not forsake the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you wake, they will talk to you. Next week, we're going to look at the cry of wisdom. The cry of wisdom. Thank you all. Thank you for those that have been online for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.